and welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. Great to be back with you again at America's Voice News. And you can find us at America's Voice News and just download the app on Roku and Apple TV. And we've got some news coming up soon regarding our show on that platform. You can also find us at YouTube. Just type in Whiskey Politics, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're on the road, please don't watch us. Listen to us, iTunes, Stitcher, GooglePlay, as well as the Ricochet Audio Network. So a lot of news this week, and we were talking about which subject we wanted to really get into heavily, and the entire media are talking about, obviously, the Barr hearing in front of the Senate this week, and the disgusting display by Democrats. Quite frankly, it's an important subject. It's a really important subject, but what's more important, I think, in the bigger scheme of things, and we know this because the media have moved it off the front page almost as immediately as it hit, is this virulent level of anti-Semitism that is now perpetuating across the globe. It's not just in the United States. It's not just in Western Europe. We saw, obviously, last week, the new fresh attacks in a synagogue in Poway, California, at a Chabad, an Orthodox synagogue. One lady was killed, unfortunately, and several people, including the rabbi, were injured. And that is 6 months right after the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. You know, the massacre that happened there, it just boggles the mind to think that in 2019, we are dealing with this. And when we take a look at what is perpetuating this and really what we can do as a society and as a culture to combat this, we find that many of us are fighting this fight with one hand tied behind our backs. For example, the New York Times, and I know a lot of people watching this show saw this, but if you only rely upon the mainstream media, you may have not even heard about this. CBS gave the New York Times cartoon this anti-Semitic trope directly from something out of Nazi Der Stürmer cartoons with Netanyahu as a dog leading a blind Donald Trump wearing a yarmulke right before another cartoon came out with the same type of anti-Semitism with Bibi Netanyahu holding on to a tablet of the Ten Commandments with Donald Trump following him down Mount Sinai. What the heck is going on? This is 2019 and that's the New York Times? And all they could do is just say, oh, our bad. We, probably didn't filter it too bad. It was just one editor. Okay. And the problem is that everybody wants to say, oh, it's just some benign anti-Semitism. It's just a dusting of anti-Semitism. We know the left or the media really aren't anti-Semitic. Yet at the same time, we have Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman out of Minnesota. And, the Islam leader, Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, calling us termites. And they're basically attaboying and attagirling each other. And Rashid Tlaib, they are representing the Democrats today. Their face next to AOC is what we think of today's Democrats. And the House Majority Leader couldn't contain them, couldn't condemn them, couldn't get Steny Hoyer and all of the others that supposedly are standing up for the rights against racism and racial bigotry and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. They couldn't stand up and say, yeah, no, that Benjamin's thing, that was pretty bad. And meanwhile, she's speaking, I'm talking about Ilhan Omar, at different events for CARE, who quite frankly should be considered a terrorist organization with the fact that their money ends up in the hands of Hamas and Hezbollah. This is 2019. And, we're seeing this in our universities. Anti-Semitism is most pronounced with the BDS movement. And if you stand up and say that you shouldn't allow for the BDS to propagandize anti-Semitism in a way where people now have an excuse. Oh, it isn't against Jewish people. It's against Israel. Excuse me, Israel is the one home of Judaism in the world. And it's surrounded by 100 million people that want to push her out to sea. And it is the only home where anybody in the Middle East wants to live in freedom and not get thrown off a roof if you're gay, or not have to wear certain clothing if you're a female. And you can have a job if you're an Arab and support your family without having to rely upon Hamas to fund you to bomb innocent Israelis. We have a profound movement in the world right now against Israel. When I say profound, it is huge. It is massive. And we're seeing this coming from England under Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. And I don't know about you, I'm from England originally. The idea, and I've got friends in England, the idea of a Jeremy Corbyn becoming prime minister scares the heck out of everybody. So what is happening in the world right now? Where are we in 2019 on Holocaust Remembrance Week, where 6 million Jews, 1.5 million children were slaughtered on a daily basis, 10,000 a day for years? I want to talk about all of this because this is not something I think should be wiped off the main page of the New York Times, speaking of the New York Times. So I'm delighted to have with us Rabbi Shmuley. Rabbi Shmuley is considered by many the most famous rabbi in America. He's an author of 31 books. You've seen him everywhere, all over the news, podcasts, articles. He's a broadcaster. He's a relationship expert with 9 children. And we're delighted to have him join us today. So I'm very excited to have him. So stay tuned. We're going to be right back after the break. Again, I'm Dave Sussman. Don't forget to follow us also on our Facebook page. Just type in Whiskey Politics Blog on Facebook and hit the like button, and you can get updated on all of our news as well. We'll be right back after the break, folks. And welcome back, America's Voice News. Dave Sussman here, and I am delighted to have with us Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who's Twitter byline says Newsweek and Washington Post calls the most famous rabbi in America. He's a world-renowned author of, I think it's 31 books, broadcaster and relationship expert. Thank you for joining us. Rabbi Shmuley, you prefer what?
Shmuley, Rabbi Shmuley.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
The byline should say best-looking rabbi in America, to be perfectly honest, but let's not get petty.
All right. We'll get some of the Twitter guys to fix that for you. Listen, before we get into heavy politics, and there's a lot going on in the world right now that we want to have your input on, so I greatly appreciate you taking the time. But listen, I've known many rabbis in my life. Some are internally focused towards their sanctuary, and others, like my first American rabbi, I came from England, which is where I believe you were a rabbi in Oxford. Is that correct?
I was, 11 years, correct.
Wow. So my first American rabbi, you may remember him, Rabbi Schulweis, he bar mitzvahed me. He was interviewed on television. He wrote articles all the time. He was really media savvy. Whether it's the internet or podcast, shows like this, or your 31 books that you've written, where did this drive come from for you to be such a huge vocal advocate of Judaism in Israel?
Well, the Jewish people have a biblical mandate to be a light unto the nations. It's funny, Jews have a reputation for being good businessmen. Hopefully that's a compliment. And yet a businessman is someone who kind of holds on to his intellectual property. When it comes to the Jewish people, so many of the most important ideas that we bequeath to the world, people do not trace back to the Jewish people. Monotheism and the belief in God, the Ten Commandments, ethical monotheism, the idea that every human being is created equally in the image of God. This is the basic furniture of Western values, Western civilization, and yet people believe that this is Christian or Muslim or secular humanistic. And the result of not tracing these ideas back to Judaism, because we haven't had high-profile spokespeople, is that young Jews don't take pride in their tradition. There's a direct loss. Young Jews feel that Judaism is a nice, quaint religion for 0.003% of the world's population, but it has no broader message. It has no wider application. And as a result, we're seeing rampant assimilation. So having rabbis or Jewish personalities who do articulate universal Jewish values in media forums, I think, is critical.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you've had a lot of, and I've listened to a lot of your shows. You've had you've spoken with agnostics and atheists and people of all different religions as well. I think whether you are Jewish, Catholic, Christian, Muslim, whatever your religion, I think we can agree now that fewer people today are going to temple or church. As a rabbi, does this concern you, and what are the negative ramifications of a more secular society?
Well, I lived in the UK for 11 years. In Western Europe, God is essentially dead. Although it's the seat of Catholicism and Christendom, I think in England, I'm guessing here, weekly church attendance, if they were lucky, is 5 or 6%. Even in very staunchly Catholic countries like Ireland or Italy, church attendance has cratered. The result is, I think, that the moral compass of a lot of these nations, especially when it comes to foreign policy, has been compromised. Ireland has emerged as an incredible critic of Israel, and Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Western Europe in general is perceived as to be extremely hostile to Israel. Look at the UK, where Jeremy Corbyn, an out-and-out anti-Semite, someone who doesn't even mask his hatred of the Jewish people, and we're not even going to sparse whether he's anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic. He's anti-Semitic, and he doesn't even hide it. He may become prime minister. So there are, I think, consequences to the decline of religiosity. Now, religion is a double-edged sword. We both know religion can be abused and has been abused, and in our time is being abused for horrible crimes and for horrible defamation. The key is not just to be spiritual, and it's not just to be religious. It's to have a moral framework, which is the prism through which you approach your faith. That's why the first thing God told the Jewish people when he gave them Judaism, when he gave them the Torah, is the Ten Commandments. There's no such thing as religion without do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not covet, etc. So we have a lot of people who are spiritual, who are religious, but it's not within a moral framework. If a suicide bomber believes that by blowing people up, he's going to get 50 virgins or 70 virgins, or however many they're offering these days.
72, I think.
I mean, well, who knows? Never experienced it, and hope not to.
Who would want that?
No, but just think about that. And I'm not here to be critical of Islam.
Right.
Because I know that many God-fearing Muslims absolutely categorically reject this abominable belief that by killing people, you get 72 virgins. But think about that for a moment. When I was growing up, one of the biggest issues in America was too much sex and violence on TV. Now we've kind of just given in to the whole Game of Thrones thing where, okay, sex and violence is kind of the norm. But it was a really big issue. I never had heard, however, that any strain of any religion would promise sex for violence. That was a whole new thing. So religion can also be abused. We're well aware of that. But I do think that America is uniquely positioned as the only Western country which is deeply religious. Now, you have to live in Western Europe, as I did, to understand how religious America is. The base of President Trump's political support is a religious base. It's evangelical Christians. Our money says, in God we trust. The Pledge of Allegiance is all about, God. And no political figure, be he or she Democrat or Republican, will finish a political speech without saying, God bless America. Do you understand how weird that is to European ears? Go to France and hear Macron say, God bless France. People say, what? Or ask, even a very good prime minister like Theresa May to get up and say, and God bless, God is not invoked in everyday discourse. But here in America, no one's going to vote for you unless you invoke God. And I think that's something beautiful.
How has our culture and our society turned it on its head, where talking about God in such a public forum has become a sense of, it's almost subversion, if you will, from a leftist standpoint, of taking over the country and turning us all into God-fearing. I mean, there seems to be this relationship, this parallel, if you will, between being Christian or being speaking of God and being in some way a nationalist, a white supremacist today, even.
Well, look, I'm Jewish, and we are recording this on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and obviously no one has experienced more violence at the hands of white supremacists, white nationalists than the Jewish people. The Nazis were white nationalists, they were white supremacists, they were racists, and they were the scum of the earth. And they murdered 6 million Jews and 1.5 million children. And they killed them in ways that boggle the imagination, whether it was the Einsatzgruppen with mass shootings or Zyklon B gas. But 10,000 Jews died every single day. So we know that the dangers of white nationalism. When it comes to Hitler, precisely the opposite was true, of course. Hitler and Himmler wanted to return Germany to paganism. While it's true that Hitler was a lifelong Catholic who stayed on the Catholic rolls throughout his life till his dying day, he himself was really a pagan. Himmler gave the SS, they were all volunteers, his SS troops, these were pagan oaths of loyalty that they took. And of course, it really was about worshiping the Führer. It was a form of idolatry. Hitler was the real God. So I despise white nationalism. I despise white supremacy. It denies, and I have to tell you that as a religious man, anyone watching this who claims to be religious, you can't be a racist and be religious. It's a contradiction. Because the first thing the book of Genesis tells us in the very first chapter is that God created every human being in his image. And people, as Martin Luther King famously said, should never be judged by the color of their skin. They can only be judged by the content of their character. I subscribe to that completely. But so nationalism, where it's about affirmation of identity and pride in one's country without it ever denying or denigrating someone else's country, or without being that you're better than someone else's country, that could be a blessing because it's about a community of nations. It's about nations each bringing their unique contribution without believing they're superior, without, God forbid, engaging in bigotry or any kind of racism. I'm proud that I'm Jewish. I'm proud that I'm an American. Where nationalism becomes dangerous is where my nation is superior to yours and we have the right to subjugate, insult, demean, demonize. I want Israelis to be very proud of the fact that they're Israeli, and nearly all are. The problem that Israel faces is that its Arab neighbors, they have every right to be very proud of their Muslim faith, of their Arab identity. The problem is where they say there's no place for Israel in the Middle East because this is a Muslim region. And how dare the Jews take this land, which of course they never took it. The Jews are native to Israel going back millennia.
Right.
Any reader of the New Testament, even the Christian Bible, of course, knows there's only really three groups who appear in the New Testament: Jews, Romans, and Samaritans. And the Jews being the dominant group, of course, who are subjugated by the Romans, who ultimately put Jesus to death. But the point is, nationalism as a statement of pride is a wonderful thing. Nationalism as a statement of superiority is a terrible thing. So we've confused all these terms today. I believe in identity. But I do believe we are all equally created in the image of God. We're all created with equal infinite worth, and we're all created with equal and infinite dignity.
Gotcha. I want to talk about that and furthermore what's going on right now worldwide regarding this growing, seeping anti-Semitism that we're seeing rearing its ugly head as well. We'll be right back after the break with Rabbi Shmuley, and I'm Dave Sussman with America's Voice News. And Dave Sussman back with you at America's Voice News. Great to have you with us. And if you're not following us at America's Voice News, check us out. You can find the channel on Roku and Apple TV. And of course, you can find our podcast on ricochet.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Just look for Whiskey Politics. And I'm delighted to have with us somebody that I've been following for years, one of the most vocal advocates for not just Judaism, but Israel on a worldwide level. We are seeing right now, with Rabbi Shmuley joining us, Rabbi, something that is obviously really starting to concern a lot of people. It's waking up a lot of people, and that is this anti-Semitism. It's almost virulent. Now, we see we're 6 months away from the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, just down the road, a few miles from where I was married in a synagogue. We just had last weekend the Chabad in Poway, California. What is going on right now?
It's open season on the Jews. That's what's going on. You see, we really wanted to believe that after the horrors of the Holocaust, the world's biggest genocide, where 10,000 Jews died every single day. So we had 3 9/11s every single day for 4 years, 1941 to 1945, resulting in the annihilation of 6 million Jews. We wanted to believe that the world would have so frightened itself with its Jew hatred and with its consequences that the world, the Gentile world, would have wanted to purge this ancient, eternal hatred from its makeup, from its social structure forever. And we did see in countries like Germany that anti-Semitism was something that was almost embarrassing if it ever reared its head anymore, or Europe in general. But 70 years after the Holocaust, it's making a resurgence. It's kind of shocking. I mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. A shocker that an anti-Semite can maybe become the next Prime Minister of Great Britain.
Just for our audience, I don't mean to interject, but Jeremy Corbyn, he's leading the Labour Party. This was the party that was led by what's his name? The Clinton's friend. I'm mental
Tony Blair.
Now.
Who was
Tony
a great
Blair.
Friend of Israel. Yeah, great
Tony
friend of
Blair.
Israel.
Tony Blair was a centrist. How did it get so bad in England that you've got Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, now let's move it to the United States. Thank God we have not yet witnessed the Corbynization of America. But, I believe strongly that we have to have at least a two-party state. I don't want to live in communist China with a one-party state. I don't want to live in Putin's Russia with a one-party state. So, I believe that democracy is about the two wings, of a bird. There's a right wing, there's a left wing, and because there's antithetical propulsion, that's why the bird flies. It's good to have political opposition. We don't want to have one party controlling everything. We don't want to, God forbid, lose our rights. But there has to be, especially when it comes to issues like anti-Semitism, agreement among both parties, or support for the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel, and the only Jewish state in the world, and it's only this big. Mm-hmm. There's got to be bipartisan support. Things that are happening in the Democratic Party are very troubling. I would not have believed that in my lifetime I would see an open anti-Semite like Ilhan Omar walking the halls of Congress with her party refusing to condemn her vile anti-Semitism. They tried to. I give Nancy Pelosi a lot of credit. She tried to, but the party stymied her efforts. Steny Hoyer, the Democratic whip, is a great friend of Israel and the Jewish people, always has been. By the way, Nancy Pelosi's father, Catholic congressman from Maryland, was a hero to the Jewish people in the Second World War. He was a Democrat. He bucked Franklin Delano Roosevelt and publicly called him out for not doing enough to stop the slaughter of Jews during the Holocaust. The problem with a lot of the new young Democrats, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, they're the worst examples. Beto Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez. Their hostility to Israel and the Jewish people is like a bit perplexing. I kind of wonder, what did we do to them? What did we ever do to Ilhan Omar? I would love to get along with Ilhan Omar. I'd love to. I respect the fact that she takes her religion very seriously. I'm wearing a yarmulke. She wears the Islamic headdress in Congress. God bless her. I love strong affirmations of religious identity. Why does that have to spill over into hating Jews? What did we do to her? And the Democratic Party has to call her out for that. Rashida Tlaib, her hatred of Israel, it's just so glaring. And it's almost impossible, to suppress. And if I could sit with her, I'd say to her, look, I understand you're a Palestinian American. I have the greatest respect for you. You feel that Israel, is not a good country. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But don't you understand the real problem for the Palestinian people is Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that rules over, 1.5 odd million Palestinians, subjects their women to honor killings, murders and slaughters LGBT Palestinians who are forced to flee to Israel, slaughters publicly any dissent. They kill people who criticize their government. The problem with the Palestinians is Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who's seen as the moderate. His predecessor, Yasser Arafat, was on the Forbes billionaire list. The man stole all of his people's money. Right. And Mahmoud Abbas, who has not gone to elections in more than 10 years, he's 10 years past his electoral mandate, his kids are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Let alone if you criticize Abbas, you may not have your head chopped off like in Gaza, but you will be in jail like that. And I would love to tell Rashida Tlaib, don't you want your people to have the same freedoms that Arabs in Israel enjoy? So I wish we could have that conversation, but there should be bipartisan support for Israel.
Well, there should be bipartisan support for Israel, but how much of this is due to the fact that you mentioned how young they are? And I know AOC is only 29. Omar is not that young. I think she's in her late 30s, maybe. But obviously, when you're Somali born and you're raised within this environment, it's a continual hatred. You have obviously a disposition, and how much of that is we're seeing on our colleges today. You have the BDS movement, where Israel is victimizing. Okay, they're occupying, as you talked about, the Palestinians. I've been to Israel several times. Arabs work in Israel. They are treated more fairly in Israel than any other place in the Middle East. You're not thrown off a roof if you're gay. You can work for a living and support your family. If you're living in Gaza, you're subjugated by Hamas and you're incentivized with $25,000 to blow yourself up and kill innocents in Israel. How do they not see that?
It goes beyond that. Israel has 1.5 million Arab Muslim citizens. They not only enjoy every right that a Jew has. To be honest, there's reverse discrimination. They have one great right that Jews don't have, which is they have the right not to go to the army. There's no conscription for Arab citizens. Now, so Israelis are forced to fight and die to protect the country. The Arab Israeli citizens are not conscripted. And if you think conscription is not a big issue, look at what it did to the United States during the Vietnam era. Look at how it tore this country apart when the United States instituted a draft during the Vietnam era. And we hear about it till today with political candidates who were eligible for the draft at that time. So it can tear a country apart. Yeah. The fact is that Israel has Arab Supreme Court justices. An Arab judge is the one who sent former Israeli President Moshe Katsav to jail on accusations of rape. And remember that, for those who call Israel an apartheid state, imagine if during South Africa, if a black judge could have sent the white president of South Africa to jail. It's unimaginable. Israel is a thriving, majestic democracy. It is vilified and demonized by its Arab neighbors who want to scapegoat the Jews in order to divert from their own human rights abuses. That's what this is about. In the same way that Hitler used the Jews as a scapegoat for all of Germany's problems, hyperinflation, today Israel is used to scapegoat as a diversion from the vile human rights abuses that take place by Israel's neighbors. Look at Syria. 500,000 innocent Arab Muslims have been slaughtered in the Syrian civil war, a great many by poison gas. Who understands the wretchedness of poison gas for murder more than the Jewish people? And this was allowed to continue until President Trump, by the way, attacked Assad for doing it. I was on a Fox News interview a little while ago. I think it was Greg Gutfeld. And I was on with a very famous imam, one of America's best-known imams, very fine man. And he was saying that President Trump is an Islamophobe and doesn't like Muslims. And I waited for him to finish, and I said, Imam, with all due respect, President Obama, you probably believe, was friendly to Muslims more than Trump. And yet, when Muslim children were gassed with sarin poison gas, mustard poison gas, in front of the whole world, dying with their mouths foaming from this vile poison gas, Obama did absolutely nothing. But when the Muslim hater Trump watched these beautiful children die at the hands of this butcher Assad, he struck him with American missiles. A friend of mine said to me, Shmuley, but that didn't really matter because it was a pinprick. The airfields that were attacked, he said, were in use a few days later. So I said to him, I shared a conversation with the great Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel was the most famous Holocaust survivor. President Obama rightly called him the conscience of the world on the day that he died, July 2nd, 2016. Elie Wiesel once told me, when I asked him, would you have wanted the United States to bomb Auschwitz during the Holocaust, knowing that as a prisoner you would have died? He said, of course. I said, but you would have died. He said, I would have died knowing that there is justice in the world. So President Trump showed when he attacked Assad, there is justice in the world. You're not going to gas innocent Arab Muslim children and get away with it, not on America's watch.
Last few seconds before our last break with you here, I understand you're being threatened by Ilhan Omar's photographer. What's going on with that?
Yeah, what a bizarre story. So we took out a full-page ad, full color as well, on page A5, I think, right at the beginning of the Washington Post, at the end of March, quoting her speeches against Jews, how the Jews hypnotize the world, how the Jews, it's all about the Benjamins, Jews use cash to buy politicians, Jews are guilty of dual loyalty. And what we did was we traced her words back to some of the most vile anti-Semitic texts in the modern world. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, I think published in 1904, the International Jew that was printed by Henry Ford, I think in 1922, and it was a very powerful ad. And there was an image of Ilan Omar that we got from her Facebook page, and we did everything in accordance with Facebook standards. The picture was there on the Facebook page. We got a weird call the next day or so, our staff, who report to me that someone was using expletives, saying we were going to be sued. And then we suddenly get a lawyer's letter saying that the image was registered for copyright only after our ad appeared. And they now, and the lawyer says we can be sued for $150,000 for the use of the image. It was on our Facebook page. We used it in accordance with Facebook standards. There was no copyright on it. And instead of them like even reaching out nicely and saying, how could threatening us, we will not be silenced when we fight anti-Semitism. We will not be silenced when we expose Ilan Omar and her vile anti-Semitism, which has no place in the halls of Congress. We will not be silenced by those who try to bankrupt us and stop our fight against anti-Semitism. We will fight to protect the Jewish people.
Gotcha. It doesn't sound like they have a case at all. Anyway, I want to talk a lot more. We're going to take our last break here with Rabbi Shmuley and Dave Sussman here at America's Voice News. I'm loving this. This is really interesting stuff. We'll be right back after the break. And welcome back. Dave Sussman here at Whiskey Politics on America's Voice News. And you can find me at David Sussman on Twitter and our Facebook page. And Shmuley, where can folks find you, by the way?
Twitter at Rabbi Shmuley, RABBISHMULEY. Facebook, we have a page of almost 1 million people, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, BOTEACH. Instagram, Rabbi Shmuley. And they can find me right here with you, Dave.
Awesome. So you obviously just saw the New York Times. They allowed for a cartoon that's been published. It could have been published by Der Stürmer. I mean, Bibi as a Jewish dog leading a blind Donald Trump. And after they apologized, we saw another cartoon with Bibi walking off Mount Sinai with one of the tablets, the 10 Commandments, with Trump behind as well. It's the New York Times. You don't get any more mainstream than the New York Times. Do you think this will move some of the more secular or leftist Jews to wake up and see what's going on?
Well, if you don't mind, I want to first just focus on the cartoon.
Please.
The cartoon had every anti-Semitic trope in it, bar one. I mean, they had the big nose. It wasn't just Bibi's face on a dog, so the Jew as animal, but he had this giant nose, so check. He had these menacing dark eyes with the menacing eyebrows, check. Yeah. The caricature of the ugly Jew. It had the Jew manipulating, exploiting, taking advantage of the world powers, Protocols of the Elders of Zion, check. It had the hated Donald Trump suddenly Jewified, suddenly Trump's wearing a yarmulke, check. The only thing missing was like a bar of gold in Bibi's mouth. Had they put that in, it would have been complete. How did this get into the New York Times? Well, let me make the argument that my very dear friend Bret Stephens, the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times, said. He said this wasn't just a mistake. This results from so much defamation of Israel in the editorial pages, the attacks on Israel, that's constant attacks on Israel, that the editor, who they say put it in as her singular decision without any oversight, did so. Bret is saying they did so because this is how they were conditioned to think about Israel from the pages of the New York Times. So if it had been an image of Ilan Omar attached to a canine, the editor or anyone else, an African-American leader, the editor would have called up the cartoonist and said, "Are you out of your mind sending this garbage to us?" But because it was a Jew, the Jews are demonized so much today that making the most famous Jew in the world and a man who just won his 5th term as Israel's political leader into a dog, because, he's a dog. So that's the problem. You see, it's the desensitization, it's the conditioning of seeing Jews as less than human. And I want to also just focus on the New York Times reaction. You probably know, Dave, that Roseanne Barr is a close friend of mine. I just took her, we went to Israel together, had a wonderful time. She's a big supporter of Israel. Mm-hmm. She wrote an offensive, stupid tweet. She should not have sent it. It was extremely offensive. She apologized to Valerie Jarrett. We did a podcast together. She cried. She begged for forgiveness. She lost her show. She lost her life's work. The New York Times chief television critic did a story right afterwards saying that ABC was right to fire her because you have to give no sanctuary to bigotry. Why didn't the New York Times fire this editor then? What is she doing? We don't even know who the editor is. Right. They won't even name the same New York Times, which exposes the malfeasance of every person on earth accused of anything, will not expose which editor did this. Think about that for a moment. Why are they hiding his or her identity? Why haven't they taken immediate disciplinary action to fire them? Now, let me just say, I believe in forgiveness. I'm hoping the person is not fired as long as they personally, not the New York Times, issues an apology to the Jewish community. I would accept it. And I would encourage all my Jewish brethren to accept it. I would encourage Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man for whom I have the great admiration, to accept it. Because we Jews taught the world forgiveness. We believe in forgiveness. I think Roseanne should have been forgiven. But without an apology and without repentance, there shouldn't be forgiveness.
And that's the difference, because when you see on the left today, the outrage mobs would have been outside this person's house and had them boycotted, fired from their jobs, and so on. And I think that really is a big difference. And it probably just isn't a religious thing. It's more of a philosophical thing, I think, between right and left. Now, regarding the reaction here in America, in the United States specifically, regarding the New York Times ad, there's a movement right now called Jexodus, and I don't know how big or small it is, but the reality is that 72% of Jews voted for Hillary Clinton, 75% voted for Obama. Do you think there is a movement, and is this in any way helping that movement?
Well, look, a community has to vote its values, and the Jewish community, I think, felt tremendous gratitude to Franklin Delano Roosevelt for defeating Hitler. Now, to be fair, Roosevelt could have done and should have done so much more to specifically rescue the Jews of Europe during the Holocaust. The head of the visa section at the State Department during the Holocaust was a man named Breckinridge Long. He was an out-and-out anti-Semite, so very few Jews were allowed in. We know terrible stories of ships filled with Jews that weren't allowed to disembark in the United States and went straight back to the gas chambers. Mm-hmm. Having said that, you have to give Roosevelt tremendous credit. He did prosecute the war, defeated Hitler, stopped the Holocaust, even though 6 million had already died. And there was great gratitude in the Jewish community for that. What the Jewish community needs to look at now, politically, is their values. So I'm not going to tell anyone who to vote for, and I'm not going to tell anyone which party to be a part of. There's no question that President Trump has been incredibly supportive of Israel and arguably the best friend Israel's ever had in the White House. But having said that, I never want to see the Corbynization of America, where the Labor Party is lost completely, as headed by an anti-Semite, and the Conservative Party are the ones that we can rely on. No, there should be bipartisan support for Israel. So I would like to see Jewish support for both parties. Having said that, now transcending the political sphere and looking at the value sphere, do I, as a rabbi and as an American Jew, feel tremendous gratitude to President Trump for recognizing for Jerusalem, moving the embassy, stopping the defamation of Israel at the United Nations, ending all funding to the Palestinian Authority when the money is used, taxpayer money, to pay terrorists for killing Jews. Of course, I feel gratitude, because gratitude is a Jewish value. But I don't want to see support for Israel being only a one-party thing, the way it's happening in England. So communities have to vote their values.
Gotcha. You mentioned Roseanne Barr being a good friend of yours. Another friend of yours, at least once was Cory Booker. Okay, yeah. Senator and presidential candidate from New Jersey. Yep. And you're famously known for your friendship with Cory, and you suggest that his vote for the Iran deal changed everything for you. What does that mean?
It was a betrayal of a friendship. Politics should never become between friends, but genocide and genocidal aspirants should. So Cory could vote on Israel what he wants, obviously. And that's not tied to our friendship, even as I always pushed him to support Israel and stand with the Jewish people, which he did. But I'm not going to say our friendship should end if he decides to vote against the annual military funding that the United States provides to Israel, etc. The Iran deal was different, because the Iran deal was about a nation threatening the Jews with the second Holocaust. Not once, not twice, but nonstop, repeatedly. Right. And Cory voted to give that government $150 billion. When people say to me, oh, but it was Iran's money. No, it wasn't. It was the Iranian people's money. The money went to the regime. These are thieves. These are snake oil salesmen. These are terrorists and killers. Khamenei, Ahmadinejad. And Corey voted to give these killers $150 billion, including $2 or $3 billion, as President Trump always points out, that was delivered in 747s in cash. But worse, he voted to legitimize their nuclear program, which with sunset clauses would give Iran a legitimate nuclear weapon in about 9 years. That's tough to absorb from my closest friend. My people suffered one Holocaust, and it was one Holocaust too many. And, I said to Corey that even if he was going to vote for the deal, which I really hoped he wasn't, and I tried everything to prevent him from doing so, I said to him, at the very least, go to the Senate floor and condemn Iran's genocidal ambitions, genocidal promises to annihilate 6 million Jews in Israel. Speak out. And during the, year-long debate around the Iran deal, he didn't do that once on the floor of the Senate. To say Iran is a vile genocidal, even if you're going to vote for the deal because you believe it's going to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon, which is kind of an absurdity, given the sunset clauses. But even if you did believe that, at least say they're a vile genocidal government. But that speech didn't come. So this friendship was betrayed because my people, which are the most hated, persecuted people in the history of the world, face not just Jews being shot in the synagogues here in America and rising anti-Semitism, terrorist attacks in Israel every day. We face the most vile government in the world, just a few hundred miles from Israel, developing a nuclear bomb, and they're threatening to kill all of Israel's Jews. And if my friend, who's a United States Senator, can't speak out against that, then you have to ask, what is friendship?
How has he reacted to your public statements between you and him?
Well, you have to ask him that. I would say, there's deep love between us. We are two people who could not have been closer. He was my student president at Oxford. I opened the doors of the American Jewish community to Corey because of his love for our people and love of Israel. And he and I gave speeches together in synagogues across the United States. I introduced him at giant AIPAC events. And the Jewish community got behind him for all its political races because of his great love for our people. And I would ask him to please return to his values. Return to strong support for Israel. Corey voted against Taylor Force, the Taylor Force Act, which stops Palestinians from getting money to murder Jews. He voted against that in committee. Corey condemned the moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem. Corey just voted against a measure in the Senate that would punish BDS. So, Corey, what's going on? I know you love the Jewish people.
The reason I asked the question is because how many differences can you have with one individual about such huge issues? I mean, he supported President Obama. In 2015, President Obama's State Department funded what were they called, V15, which was this splinter group headed by Jeremy Bird, one of Obama's staffers, to run a candidate against Bibi Netanyahu, interfering in a foreign election to change Israel's government. And Booker was behind him all the way on that. So this isn't just, the Iran deal. This goes back years.
Right. So my response to that would be that there will always be differences between friends on politics, especially when one of them is a politician, an elected official. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't going to parse every vote Corey did, even if I found it objectionable. But genocide is my red line. The Iranian nuclear agreement between Obama and the mullahs of Iran sanctioned a government that threatened the annihilation of the Jewish people repeatedly. This is in stark violation to the 1948 United Nations Anti-Genocide Convention, which expressly outlaws, forbids, and makes illegal any genocidal threats against a UN member state. All of this was overlooked by the Obama administration to get this deal done as their signature foreign policy issue. And Corey voted for it. So it's not about, we would always have some differences. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Friends have differences. But genocide is the red line. It's the red line. It's the red line. It can't be crossed.
Right. Last question for you, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time for us today. You are obviously an advocate of Israel, and there is a lot of I would say, misrepresentation in American media about anti-Semitism, who is an anti-Semite, who's a nationalist, a white nationalist, and so on. And one of the publications that has taken a lot of incoming over the years has been Andrew Breitbart's namesake magazine. And you have said that Breitbart has been one of the stalwarts of support for Israel and the Jewish people. Why is there such a discrepancy between what we're hearing from the left about this publication and the reality of what you see with Breitbart?
Well, anyone that reads Breitbart will see that they have been staunch, stalwart supporters of Israel. Mm-hmm. That whenever Israel is demonized, whenever people try to boycott Israel, Breitbart rises to Israel's defense. Breitbart opened a bureau in Jerusalem so that they could specifically write from the source about threats to Israel and make sure that Israel's voice is heard and make sure that Israel's perspective is properly represented. That's a big deal. They've been staunch supporters of Israel. And anti-Zionism is nothing but another form of anti-Semitism. People hate Israel not because of any bogus reasons that they invent. It's the world's oldest hatred. It's hatred of the Jewish people. So Breitbart has stood staunchly with the state of Israel, certainly when many other publications had refused, certainly when many other publications were ganging up. We just spoke about the New York Times' disgusting, vile, anti-Semitic cartoon. Right. And I'm grateful to Breitbart for their stalwart support of Israel.
So it's obviously not warranted, is what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is that anyone that reads Breitbart on a daily basis will see that they have Israel's back.
Yeah.
And they've always had Israel's back. And the Jewish community, the pro-Israel community, I think is immensely grateful for that unbridled, unconditional support of the world's only Jewish state, which faces genocidal threats from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from Iran on a daily basis.
Great. Rabbi, got any events coming up? People can find you?
Yeah, go to shmuley.com or go to our Facebook page, as I said, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, or Twitter at Rabbi Shmuley, or Instagram Rabbi Shmuley. And I thank you very much for having me, Dave. God bless you.
God bless you too. Thank you for everything you're doing and greatly appreciate you taking the time. We'll have you back on again, hopefully down the road. And God bless. And folks, you can continue watching us at America's Voice News. And we'll be back again real soon with another fascinating interview with another fascinating individual. I'm Dave Sussman signing off. Cheers.